Hello and welcome back to the Notcast. It's episode 257. It is the 29th of December 2022, which means that 24 years ago tonight I was watching New Order and Underworld at the Manchester Evening News Arena perform an all-nighter show that finished at about 5 o'clock in the morning, I think, called Temptation. It was the first time that I saw Underworld. It was the last time that the four-piece classic lineup of New Order played Manchester. And because it's an anniversary and because I can, today I am going to be talking about Underworld's 8th studio album, Barking, and a live album, a soundtrack, a bunch of CDs, the Olympics opening ceremony, and a whole bunch of other stuff that happened around about that time. This was a good period to be a fan of the band, 2010 to around about 2013. Not amazing, but pretty good. And it showed the band in a period of change and flux. And so, therefore, rather than me just kind of show these things out and go, oh, look, shiny objects, like I'm some kind of human magpie. I mean, obviously, I am a human magpie because I collect all this nonsense. We're just going to talk through it, really, and my experiences of what happened around about then. It was a strange period to be an Underworld fan when this album came out. The album is called Barking, named after the unloved and unlovely London Borough, which I worked in for about 18 months many years ago, and I must admit I didn't enjoy any of my time there. I didn't think it was a particularly nice part of the world. And if I say any more than that, I probably breach some terrible protocols that I shouldn't do. It's a good name for an album, not such a lovely place. The album was released in September 2010, and this album, for me, Barking, is the sound to me of, or more correctly, it's an album that I associate with me casting off the shackles of depression and worry. The immediate preceding period, 2006 to 2009, was super difficult for me. I mean, in the middle of 2006, from being in a relationship and being in a job that I'd been in for several years, to being divorced in quite a brutal way. There are some people that when you split up with somebody, you want to unravel everything, and you just want to untangle everything. You want to do it nicely and calmly, and so that nobody gets particularly hurt, and both go, well, we tried that and it didn't work. We're going to try and go in separate directions. This one, it was like just tearing all the things out from the patient on the operating table, whilst the patient spasms. It was I wanted an amicable situation, and the other party didn't seem to want to do that. So the immediate couple of years before this, as I'd mentioned in my previous episode about Underworld, I had really lost my love of life. I was existing as the Max Strict Preacher song. I think it's Peeled Apples in the album Journal for Plague Lovers, which came out in 2009, by the way. There's a line about cleaning, cooking and flower arranging, about carrying on and just doing the things that you do because that's what you do. It's not a thing that you like to do. There wasn't necessarily an aim or a purpose to it. So the period immediately before this album came out, the 3 years before, was a period of me doing stuff and it not working. You put the inputs in, and you always work and aspire towards things being better or more equal or fairer, or you put the effort in, but the effort wasn't turning into results. I wanted to be happy, and it wasn't quite working out that way. I wanted to have a good job. The work situation was very difficult for me. I was effectively told, you're leaving a business that you've been at for a number of years. We either do it the easy way or the hard way, but you're leaving. That's what I was told. Maybe not in quite so many words, maybe more words than that. But that's what I was told. And so I went from a life that worked for me, that I enjoyed being part of, to, by the end of 2009, a life that was, well, at the beginning of 2009, life really wasn't working for me at all. I did have effectively a nervous breakdown, which I wasn't expecting. Nobody expects to have one of those, which was traumatic, to be in a situation where it feels like your life is becoming unglued and it's falling to pieces, and you're kind of like trying to hold everything together. And as Princess Leia gloriously said, the more you tighten your grasp, the more solar systems will slip through your fingers. And it just felt that, to me, everything I was trying to do to make my life good was failing. It wasn't succeeding. The effort, I was putting all the effort in, but I wasn't getting the outputs. So it was a really, really difficult time for me, 2009. And the Barking album, this album, when it came out in September 2010, and I listened to it, it was almost as if a shaft of golden sunlight had fallen through the clouds and bathed me in joy. And I suddenly was like, I can feel joy again. Because when I'd listened to Oblivion with Bells in 2007, which I'd mentioned previously, I didn't feel that. When I heard this, and I was like, this is what I've been missing. You know, my pleasure receptors. It felt like all the inputs, you'd pressed all the buttons to get all the things and go on all the rides, and it wasn't working. Whereas now, when I listened to this for the first time, it was like, I'm becoming who I am again. I'm coming back to life. So for me, this album is really, really important to me as a record that reflects and echoes and was the soundtrack to me kind of surfacing from a fog of misery. Now that sounds very, very dramatic, and it almost definitely is very, very dramatic when you put it that way. But the period of 2007 to 2009 was amongst the worst I'd ever had. In fact, I mean, that whole decade that ran from February 2000 through to around about April 2009 was the hardest 9 years of my life. No wonder I felt like I'd constantly been smacked in the face by reality that just wasn't quitting. And then I came out the other side. So this is by the way, I should point out, this is a very, very good Underworld album. It's an Underworld album that isn't really recognised as such, and it probably should be. It's only 9 songs long and about 55 minutes. It's an album that sounds joyous. And I don't think that necessarily reflects the working methods that had happened. Underworld as a core duo, Rick Smith and Carl Hyde, had been working together for 30 years by the time this album came out. And what's notable about this album that doesn't happen with any of the other Underworld albums is that they're all collaborations and co-productions. I think there's only one track on the album which doesn't have any input from an outside third party that's been brought in to sweeten and underworldize the album. And that track is Louisiana, the last track on the album. Brian Eno was brought in to work on Louisiana, and when he listened to it, he said, I wouldn't change a thing, it's perfect. Which is why it doesn't have any changes in it. But every other track on the album has significant intervention and input from people that aren't members of Underworld in a way that Underworld have never really done before. So the first fruits of this period, which came out, which you could hear, was the track Hamburg Hotel, which was played live once in Berlin in 2008, the day after it was written, in a hotel in Hamburg. And other tracks such as Scribble, also known as You Do, have been played live on and off in an instrumental form in 2003. Always Loved a Film had been played live on the Lemon Worm broadcasts, and it had also been played live at Brixton, so it's on the Live at Brixton CD, which I probably should have got off the shelf over there as well. But it was played in an instrumental form. Between Stars had been played live in 2009 in a nearly finished form. Diamond Jigsaw had been played live a couple of years or maybe a year before the album had come out. So all these tracks were being road tested live in front of audiences, but as Underworld was a 2 or 3 piece, sometimes with Darren Price, sometimes without. And what became clear, I think, through that is that the songs had got to a certain point, but they hadn't been finished. So just looking at a series of potentially very interesting tracks with huge amounts of potential in there, but weren't actually complete. And so we needed to have, or they made the decision to bring some third parties in and they brought in producers such as Dubfire, Mark Knight, Dee Ramirez, Apple Blim on Hamburg Hotel, whoever that is, High Contrast as well, Paul Van Dyke, showing that I'm not really with it, and a bunch of other stuff as well. And really it was the band trying to sound like Underworld and bringing other people in to kind of almost mediate the relationship as a musical therapist, as the band went effectively to a form of dance floor counselling. The first track to appear from the album, which isn't actually on the album, it's a standalone single called Downpipe, by Mark Knight and Dee Ramirez, I believe, or featuring Underworld. And effectively, it's a song that the band took out of the album and released as a standalone single. It is, to all intents and purposes, one of the very best songs from the Barking era. It was played live every show of the tour. It was the opening track of every show of the tour. It should have been on the album. It isn't. It got a very, very limited 12-inch release. It now sells for something like £100. And I don't have it, so I can't show it to you. But then it's officially another artist featuring, so I think we can live with that. And then I think the first proper kind of song from this particular period is a remix of David Lynch's Good Day Today, which was David Lynch's first solo single, and it's taken from his debut LP, which was effectively a dark kind of semi-Tom Waits style, deep blues rock album. By the way, the David Lynch solo albums, I think they're brilliant, actually. I really, really enjoy them, really love them. I think they're absolutely great, and I recommend them highly to you, but they definitely don't sound like Underworld. So getting Underworld into remix Good Day Today was a pretty brave kind of thing to do. And in fact, it's not even a remix. To all intents and purposes, Good Day Today is a cover version of the David Lynch track. All the David Lynch instrumentation and vocals have been removed completely, and they have been replaced by Rick Smith doing all his lovely magic, and additional vocals by Carl Hyde. It is, to all intents and purposes, an Underworld track. And Good Day Today, by the way, if you haven't heard it and you don't know it, you really, really should. I think it's absolutely brilliant. There is a CD single. Here it is, in a trifold pack with a picture postcard of David Lynch artwork. And it's getting harder to get because I think CD singles were practically extinct in 2009, 2010, and they're even more practically extinct now anyway. But there it is. The first song that you heard that was officially Underworld was the track Scribble, which was released as a 12-inch, a limited edition 12-inch. Again, I don't have it because I have the promotional CD of Scribble here, and it's also, I think, track 3 on the album. So Scribble first had its appearances under the name You Do, where it was effectively a drum and bass instrumental without vocals or melody. It was a banger of an instrumental, but it was completely embryonic in its production and presentation. The closest thing I think Underworld have done to proper drum and bass, aside from the phenomenal remix of Gold Is the Shadow, which came out in 1998. There's a Rick Smith mix of that, which I'll link to down there, which is gorgeous. Actually, it's the most threatening bit of drum and bass I've ever heard. And also, I think it's very clearly touched by the hand of Underworld, and Scribble is a very drum and bass influenced track. I think it's fair to say. It was first played in Tokyo in 2003. It was played a little bit between 2005 and 2009, and then with vocals has been played as recently as the passing summer this year. And it's okay. It's a very interesting song. It's quite atypical. It's very definitely a sound that Underworld have never attached to their singles before. And you can listen to it and go, okay, that's fine, but it does sound, and this is one of the problems, is if you try to sound current, especially if you take a while between albums, you're always going to sound behind. And sometimes you should never try and align yourself to whatever is popular at that time. You should always do what feels right and true to you. Because if you're right and true to yourself, and obviously Underworld are, you can never be mistaken for anything else. But with the heavy drum and bass kind of element of it, it did feel a little bit that the world had moved on from where Underworld were at the point that this came out. It didn't get a commercial CD release. This is a promotional CD single that I just need to check is actually silver pressed, but it's silver pressed as a just a promo, and it's called Underworld 0031 according to the Matrix, which means that Underworld have released 30 previous proper releases on their own label. But Scribble, I quite like it. It's a good track live. I've seen them play it live. It always works very, very well. But I didn't see Underworld in this period for reasons which will become blatantly apparent. The next thing that we had was the album Barking, which was released in a number of formats. Here's the 3-disc box set. Here is the 2-disc deluxe edition that comes with the DVD of promotional films. Here is the double vinyl LP, and if you look carefully, each one of them has a slightly different variant of the cover on there. There are 7 in total different variants of the LP cover, I think to put it correctly. There's one for the LP, one for the CD, this one for the box set. They all look and feel roughly the same when you put them all together, but they are completely different images actually. Well, let's go into the LP and see what it is. It opens up with a track called Bird One, also known in some forms as Strumpet Groove. And Strumpet Groove was played live in 2009 and 2010. It was first recorded in 2002 for the 100 Days Off album. It was played live as a largely instrumental in 2007, 2008, and then played and then kind of reconfigured with a vocal and a different structure as Bird One, and played live from 2009 all the way through to 2010, a whole year. Woohoo! It should have been played more often actually, but it's a great little track actually. Absolutely love it. I have remixed Bird One, and I've put it on my Mixcloud, which I will post a link up to for you. It was released as a CD single. Well, it wasn't released as a CD single. It was released as a download only single actually, and not in any commercial physical form. But I have the promotional CDs of Bird One. There is the 3-tracker, which features an edit, the album version, and an instrumental. And this is the remix CD promotional copy, which features remixes with there's a Club EQ version of the LP track, there's a Clouds remix, a remix dub, a Lone remix, Lone dub, Tonga and Rogers, whoever they are, Mark Broom vocal and Mark Broom dub as well. Is it any good? Well, most of the remixes actually are pretty faithful. And I've been able to pull together a 20-minute version of Bird One, but unfortunately has been nuked by the copyright Nazis of Mixcloud. Otherwise, I would link you to it, but you can. There's a 20-minute version of it that I've created of Bird One. It is a great song to open the LP with. Actually, it's got just a lovely little approach of starting off with a slow, gentle build, moving through all the possible permutations of it, going to a vocal, and I could hear it pretty much any day of the week, and I would love it. Because one of the things about Underworld tracks is when they build these songs together is you can clearly tell from the length and gestation that some of these songs have had. I mean, obviously Bird One has been existing in various forms for, I think, 8 or 9 years before release. Is that nothing is truly lost. Everything is revisited. They try again. They say, what can we make with this? How can we present this? What can we do with this song? Can we make this song work? And just keep going. And then eventually, sometimes you just land on exactly what the arrangement should be. And what the arrangement should be is, of course, absolutely perfect. And when you listen to that arrangement, you then go, there's no other way this arrangement of the song could work. This is the only way the song could actually form itself out. And when you have the time to go through all the options, you then make the right choice every time. Of course, if you don't have the time, you end up with hot garbage like Rise of Skywalker, which is one of the very worst films I have ever seen. Apart from one film I've seen this year, which I will mention in a couple of days when I do my Films of the Year episode, by the way. I'm sure that one won't surprise you if you care. But Bird One is a great song. I wish they'd play it live more often. But it had a promotional video which appears on the box sets, and there's also an early version. So the album itself, by the way, this is the deluxe version of the album. If you are only going to get one version of it, this is probably the one to get. It's got the most bang for your buck, to put it technically, although I think this one's getting increasingly difficult to find, and certainly more difficult to afford. It comes in a tough cardboard sleeve here, where you can kind of, it doesn't really fit together particularly well, but that's the box. And then inside here we have a hardback book, and the hardback book, by the way, hang on a second, I'll just take put a couple of promotional postcards for Barking inside the book, as well as a promotional postcard for Frankenstein, which was an album that the band did in 2011. And then you kind of go through the book, and there's 3 discs. So you have disc 1, which is the LP there. That's the standard 9 tracks. Disc 2, which is the alternative versions, which is exclusive to this box set. And then disc 3 is the DVD that features 9 promotional films plus 2 alternates of the promotional films. And the book that goes with it, by the way, has a page for each one of the songs, plus live photography from the band's live dates, kind of giving you an impressionistic idea of what life might be like to be on stage in Underworld, alongside photographs that Carl Hyde has taken, and interviews with the band members and the collaborators that they have. So track 2, for example, is a co-production with Mark Knight and Dee Ramirez, following on from Downpipe. And by the way, when the band did play live, they played Downpipe and Always Loved a Film together as a medley. And Always Loved a Film is, to me, one of the very best of the Underworld tracks. It's an absolute bloody classic. And, having seen them play it live, I can confirm it is, put technically, a banger live. It has a phenomenal crowd interaction and response. So Always Loved a Film did get a single release. We have a couple of the CDs here. Again, no commercial physical release, but 2 promotional CDs. This one, the radio edit, the album version, and an instrumental version of the track. The instrumental version of the track is full length and does not fade out, and is not truncated. So if you're going to go for the full length version of it, I've had to create my own edit of the instrumental and the album version together for my playlist. And we also have this, which is the extended club version, which is again probably the LP mix, which is fully extended. We have a Michael Woods remix, a dub remix by Michael Woods, a solo remix, and Breakage's Laser Fingers remix, whatever that means in English, I don't know. Again, promotional CD of 5 remixes. To all intents and purposes, this is effectively a CD single in a card sleeve, and that is how I think of it. But Always Loved a Film is, to me, one of the very best of the Underworld songs ever written. It was probably around about the time that I was listening to Always Loved a Film on a knackered train commute, either going to or from work one day, and it just struck me like a moment of revelation, that I had triumphed against the forces that were seeking and conspiring to make me miserable. I wouldn't say that they were trying to do that necessarily to make me miserable, but that was certainly the byproduct of it. So there's this chilling quote by Stanley Kubrick, the one that says, the worst thing about the universe is not that it is hostile to you, but it is utterly indifferent. And that is how I felt, is, the things that were happening in my life were not aimed at me personally, like the woman from Harry Potter, which I probably should forget that Harry Potter exists, all things considered, but that it was just a casual kind of, I was just, meat that was in the grinder as the grinder kept grinding, and it didn't really care whether I was there or not. Life was going to happen, and these were the things that were going to happen to me. And it was when I was listening to this song and I suddenly realised that the things which I thought that I'd lost forever, joy, hope, positivity, euphoria, a sense of heaven that music used to be able to provide to me. And then at some point it had stopped working because of the circumstances around me had caused circumstantial depression, that suddenly I realised I triumphed throughout that. And it's sometimes you only when something's happening and you realise that you don't feel hounded by the things that are actively trying to cause negative impact on your life, and you suddenly realise, oh, I've defeated them. Because in much the same way as when depression or crisis hits your life, it doesn't knock on the door and go, I'm a crisis, by the way, mate. Here it comes, the fucking. No, it just disappears quietly, and it doesn't necessarily tell you. I mean, sometimes there are very specific key events that happen that might happen. You know, you get a decision from a court or a tribunal, or you get a letter or something. But it's not a case of, well, we're going to do this to make someone's life easy. It's just that's the path that the water has taken at that particular point in life. And always loved a film, to me, was the song that, to quote the band, kind of captured a spirit of positivity, euphoria, a sense of summer, and a sense of Ibiza. That sense of it can be as good as you want it to be. This is, life at its peak. And certainly the last time that I saw Underworld live, which was Wembley Arena, 7th of December 2019, the last pre-COVID show that the band played, and the last indoor headline show, non-festival show the band have played to date, I think. And they played Always Loved a Film, and for me that was one of my holy grail songs. It was like when I was listening to it in 2010, I'm like, I want to be in the room when they play that. I need to be in the room when they play that. And they played that at Wembley. And whilst Carl doesn't necessarily write lyrics that are personal, there's the line that goes, and I don't know if I love you more than the way that you need to love me, and I don't know if I need you more than the way you used to need me. And suddenly that's possibly the most personal lyric that there has ever been in an Underworld track. And it could be that maybe that's the reason why that lyric hasn't been sung when he's sung the track live recently. Certainly it wasn't in the Wembley Arena version that I saw in 2019. But to me, this is one of those songs where you suddenly kind of go, I've made it. I've whatever the problems that I had, not COVID problems of course, but the other issues that there were, whatever other demons I was battling, is that I had conquered them. I defeated them in some form. Track 3 on the LP, by the way, is Scribble, which we've kind of discussed before. And then track 4 is Hamburg Hotel, again written in Hamburg in a hotel. It was inspired by Aphex Twin, Orbital, Black Dog, and it was only played live once in Berlin. And then it went back into the studio, and the band worked it through a little bit more. A producer called Appleblim contributed to that, took the song apart, put it back together, and then we got the track as it was. We then had track 5, which is called Grace. Again, each one of the versions on CD2 here is a outside producer version of the track. Not necessarily the latest, the best, or the earliest, but just a work in progress that the band selected as an insight into their working method, so you could see what the song was going to be. They took the vocal from Grace and they kept that, but they reworked the music, and they did so with a producer called Dubfire. Dubfire worked on Bird 1 as well, and it was around about the same time that Dubfire was working on a track called Auto Trader. Auto Trader was a download-only song that was released from the band's website in 2008, but the Dubfire version of Auto Trader was never used, and probably, unless it's the version that's on here, is not the one. In fact, no, there isn't a version of Auto Trader on here. Why am I saying that? Complete nonsense. Good thing none of you are using this for academic purposes. We then have Between Stars, which I think is track 6, maybe track 5. Between Stars, track 6, played live in 2009, is the only really obvious track that has Darren Price, the third live member of Underworld and occasional contributor to the studio records and remixes, involved. And it's got a slightly different sound to it to the rest of the LP. I think Darren Price's writing style is more based around groove than dynamics. His solo LP, Under the Flight Path, which I think was released in 1997, and I have Downstairs on vinyl, and is you know, an interesting insight into one element of Underworld that could have been. But I think it's fair to say that Darren's writing style doesn't quite gel with Rick and Carl's. It may work very well from a personal perspective and from a technical perspective, but the writing styles are two very different things indeed. And Between Stars, which was played live between 2009 and 2014, was a Underworld plus Darren Price track that Mark Knight and D. Ramirez worked on as well, much like Downpipe and Always Loved a Film. And I think Between Stars is very good, but it's not got the sense of drama and dynamics and I think some of the other Underworld tracks have got, and that's in no way criticism, it's just different, that's all. The fourth final single released from the LP, track 7 on the album, is called Diamond Jigsaw. Here is the promotional CD of Diamond Jigsaw, by the way. And Diamond Jigsaw is, in my opinion, a great and underrated Underworld track. Again, very different from anything they've done previously. It's got quite a minimal kind of approach to it, so it's very, very heavy on guitars, which you don't always get. Guitars are often like a texture as opposed to a lead melody line in an Underworld track. On Diamond Jigsaw, this is the closest thing Underworld have got to a rock track, I think, in their career, actually, certainly after the end of Mark 1. And the approach that they took for it was a kind of like Rolling Stones versus Kraftwerk. So you listen to the instrumental version of Diamond Jigsaw, and that's a very minimalist, very, very kind of like elegant song. And then you've got this dirty great big guitar that's clearly meant to sound like, you know, Ronnie Wood or Mick Taylor or Keith Richards over it, plus vocals that have been put on the top. The LP version of Diamond Jigsaw was co-produced with Paul Van Dyk, who came in and sprinkled his deep house techno magic dust all over the track. And it was further again remixed for the single release by James Dean Bradfield of the Manic Street Preachers, the Invisible, whoever they are, Jacob Plant, and then the Invincible, Jacob Plant, and then the LP version. And the video for Diamond Jigsaw, by the way, is lovely because it's a guy dressed in a huge number of denim jeans running around London looking for a child dressed in a huge amount of denim jeans, and then pure euphoria as the two are reunited at last. We then have two more songs on the LP. We have Moon Underwater, which is, I think it's a great song, much underrated, Moon Underwater, including by the band, and with additional production from High Contrast. And finally we have Louisiana, which is a very relaxed, almost ambient track, with, as I said, Eno said that he wouldn't change a thing about it. And that brings the Barking album to a close. Now, disc 2 on the CD box set is alternate versions, and I'm going to quickly kind of read off the back here what those are. So we have the Strumpet Groove version of Bird One. So that's the version that was played live in 2007 and 2008, the first studio instrumental interpretation of it. We had the Lemon World mix of Always Loved a Film, and Always Loved a Film, by the way, as I've mentioned before, was first played live in Tokyo in 2003, and a studio version was broadcast from Lemon World in 2006. There was Scribble, brackets You Do, which is the first instrumental drum and bass version of it, which again was played live. The Hamburg Hotel Essex version. There was a Telematic Peel version of Grace, the Lemon World mix of Between Stars before any alternate producers got involved, a demo of Diamond Jigsaw, the Lemon World version of Moon in the Water, and then Jumping the Cran, which is an early version of Louisiana. And I think Jumping the Cran was broadcast from the Lemon World webcast in 2006 and 2007. There is one unreleased song from the LP which still hasn't come out, and I think people would really like to hear, which is called Bamboo. Studio versions of it were broadcast from Lemon World in 2006 and 2008, so definitely still in the running for the LP or future LPs, but it wasn't. It was played live about 15 times, and it gets a live release on some of the Live Here Now CDs. There's a number of other songs which kind of fell out from this period that were released as collaborations and as appearances on other artists' albums. But 2010 not only saw the release of Barking, by the way, which is here, upside down. Yeah, that's the right way up. It also saw the release of the first solo LP by Rick Smith called Bungalow with Stairs. Bungalow with Stairs is effectively the soundtrack to an art exhibition, which were sold at the art exhibition, and then some leftover copies were later sold online. And the art exhibition was called What's Going On in Your Head When You're Dancing by Carl Hyde. All these tracks were written and recorded and produced by Rick Smith and released in 2010. They took spoken word text from panels by Carl Hyde, and then track 8, which I think, let me guess, track 8 is called Dreve, features some text by John Warwicker, and then track 9 features text drawn from a recording of a phone conversation. Track 9 is called Soundtrack for the Film Van Halen, Van Halen. This is, to all intents and purposes, an Underworld album that Carl Hyde does not obviously appear on, but in all other respects is Underworld, as at least one of the tracks, Tokyo London 1, was played live by Underworld, by the way, when it was in the running to be an Underworld track. We also had a live album released in 2010, live from the Camden Roundhouse. This was only released physically on CD and DVD in Japan. I've got to tell you, I have watched the heck out of this. It is only 6 tracks, and those tracks are Always Loved a Film, 2 Months Off, Scribble, Rares, King of Snake and Born Slippy, but good God, they are bangers. This was a show that was free for the iTunes Festival. Competition winners got the chance to go. I entered the competition. I didn't win, which, given how many times I've watched it since then, seems really quite unfair. But of course, that's the whole point about being a competition winner, is there's not necessarily always any fairness about it. You either are lucky or you're not. But live at Camden, by the way, absolutely essential. It's probably quite expensive to get now. Like all traditional Japanese releases, it comes with a standard booklet and with a book of explanatory text and lyrics, which I've never read because they're in a language I don't understand. And then there's 2 discs inside a fold-out gatefold sleeve, which are a DVD of the show, there it is, and a CD of 6 tracks from the show. Underworld live shows at this point were not particularly exciting if you were a setlist aficionado. And I think it's fair to say that the set lists were very, very static. The arrangements were very static. It had obviously been compiled together once in the studio with the idea that most people don't see every show the band play. And the band had upgraded all of its equipment from the 2008 period. So rather than use the huge car batteries where everything was kind of created on the fly and mixed in and out of each other, it was actually, they programmed in only what they needed to play live, and so that reduced the chance for improvisation and different material and different arrangements, and it was a far more static set list that, if you went to more than one show, was probably quite rigid and unexciting, but if you went to just one show, would be absolutely clearly aimed at being a disco dance floor rave version of AC/DC, where you dance your sacks off down to the knees and they'll shake you all night long. A number of other tracks came out around about the same time, but 2011 saw the first Underworld soundtrack album, another album, this time the soundtrack for the stage presentation of Frankenstein, featuring 2 actors whose name I forget, but had interchangeable sections. I think was it Benedict Cumberbatch, and I think was it the chap from Trainspotting. I can't remember his name. Sorry, man. There's only so much information my little brain can handle. It was broadcast on British television, Frankenstein, and the 2 roles apparently were interchangeable between the 2 actors. From March 2011 it played. So Johnny Lee Miller opened at the National Theatre London on the 5th of February 2011, and the band worked from December and January, pushing together a soundtrack that accompanied the stage presentation that was then broadcast on the BBC. And actually, it's a great presentation of Frankenstein, because the two could effectively be each other's understudies and played the roles differently depending on which night you saw them. So you never knew which night it was going to be, whether Benedict was going to be the monster and Johnny Lee Miller was going to be Frankenstein, or vice versa. It's a fascinating instrumental album, mostly instrumental. I think the one of the songs on there is 17 minutes long, and has all the drama and the sweeps that you would expect from a 17-minute Underworld song. There was also some additional vocals on there, so Carl Hyde added wordless vocals as texture and melody, and also I think Esme Smith sang on a track called Sea Shanty, 2 words which I should never get together. This is not one I listen to a huge amount, but not because it's not good. It's really good, it's really interesting, but I think it works much better in the context of the play itself. And 2011 also saw, and I could be wrong on the exact date that this happened, some retrospective activity. So the release of some Christian Smith remixes of Dark and Long, which I think were unofficial but made official by virtue of the fact that they got a release. These are remixes of the Dark Train version of the track, and they're completely adequate in every way, but they're not amazing. But it's nice to have them. And there was also some collaborative activity as well. So they did, let me just quickly check. They also did a greatest hits and anthology that was released in 2012, following the end of the touring period. This is the Underworld Anthology. It's effectively an updated version of 1992 to 2002 with a couple of extra tracks on, which are To Heal, Crocodile and Scribble. A bonus CD that brings out The Hump from the B-side of Mother Earth, as well as new releases for The Big Meat Show, and first-time CD appearances or appearances of rare tracks such as Minneapolis, Y, Oik Oik, Second Hand, Park, Simple Peel and Gel to Tokyo. And it was inside the big kind of triple fold out. It was only on CD, it wasn't on any other format. I think you could download it, but of course you couldn't necessarily go and it wasn't released as vinyl or anything like that, for example. It came with a booklet, and that was your triple CD version of Underworld 1992 to 2012. For the more budget conscious version of it, there was a single CD edition of that, which was called a collection, and a collection featured all the singles, or more correctly many of the singles, but in reverse chronological order, featuring a number of new tracks, featuring a track called The First Note is Silent, which was by High Contrast, which also got a 12-inch release here, which was High Contrast featuring Underworld and Tetsu, in the days when everyone had to put verses and featuring in front of everyone as if everyone was arguing over the mixing desk, and it was really like a scrap in a pub car park. It isn't. It's a completely good song, not amazing, but it gets its CD release in a slightly edited form on here, as well as Scribble Downpipe gets its first release on CD. There's a radio edit. Crocodile, To Heal, 2 Months Off, Dark Train and a bunch of other tracks and a bunch of other mixes. We also got a track called Bebop Hurry, which was Brian Eno and Carl Hyde, the first fruits from a Carl Hyde Brian Eno team up, which you'll hear about in future. There was also a single called 10, which was a CDR, which is Underworld versus Mark Knight and Sander Van Doorn. And this feels a little bit this Downpipe, The First Note is Silent, the cover of Good Day Today, Bebop Hurry. These all feel like there were extra songs which could have been on the album but didn't quite make it. They're not bad, they're not amazing, they're just there really, and it was quite difficult to be an Underworld fan to keep track of everything that was going on and everything that was being released at the time it was being released. There was also a remix in 2013 of Res by Bass Nectar, which was released as a CD single, but I think this was only released in Japan. And this is a thoroughly modernised and updated version of Res that really takes a very unusual approach to the track and the track's rhythms and turns it inside out and upside down. It's not good, it's just different. The last thing that Underworld did in this period is something that actually I think has never really got enough notice. And it was the fact that the band did the soundtrack for London's 2012 Olympic ceremony. Here is the 10th anniversary 12-inch of two of those songs, And I Will Kiss and Caliban's Dream, which was released only through the band's website as a black vinyl 12-inch in a very, very nice sleeve, I should point out. But was first experienced, like a lot of this set was experienced, as part of the 2012 Olympic opening ceremony called Isle of Wonder, which was directed by Danny Boyle. And this, surprisingly, is 10 years ago now. It feels less than 10 years ago. It feels tantalisingly just out of reach, like on the other side of the glass of history. But the Isle of Wonder, the opening ceremony, was, to me, the last moment where Britain could really call itself, I think, great. It was a celebration of the multicultural and diverse set of experiences, languages, beliefs and ethics and morals that Britain prided itself on. And I'm going to get vaguely political here. The Conservatives have been in power for just 2 years. The Conservatives have been in power now for 12 years. So this is 10 years ago. And this is the moment where I felt that all of Britain's wonderful achievements in the world and on the world stage, things like the NHS, for example, the invention of television, the invention of or discovery of broadcast radio, all the things that Britain has brought to the world over the past 100 years or so were condensed into this glorious, abstract, fabulously articulate ceremony, which just celebrated all of the great things about Britain, including, you know, James Bond and Paddington and dancing nurses and all that type of stuff. And maybe not Paddington, but all of the things which made Britain great were there encapsulated inside this beautiful moving work of art that existed once, was broadcast all across the world and then disappeared forever. And it was a moment where I felt an immense amount of pride at being British. Now, from one point of view, being British is an accident of geography. I could have come from anywhere. I happen to come from Britain. I happen to be born in the 70s and to grow up in the 80s and the 90s and the noughties. And that is the world I came from. And that was a very exciting period to be British. It was a time when I felt quite alienated from parts of Britain, such as Britpop, for example, and that endless flag licking of the guitar and the callous sexism that went with it. There was a time when I felt quite embarrassed to be British, certainly in the past 10 years, because in the past 10 years, Britain has gone from being regarded on an international stage as being run by good people who are competent to being run by incompetent, incapable, mostly moronic idiots who value ideology over facts and practicality. And I must remember a story that I heard about the Conservative government is that when Labour were in power, they had pros and cons. So every decision they were going to make, they were going to go, what are we going to do? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? What are the pros of this and what are the cons of it? What's the negative impacts of our decisions? And what's the positive impacts of our decisions? And when the Conservatives came into power, they got rid of that. So the decisions were being made purely on the basis of, we think it's a good idea. There wasn't, nobody ever sat there and went, what are the negative consequences of this? And then ultimately you get into a situation where Liz Truss is Prime Minister, Kwasi Kwarteng is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and they make a decision that tanks the economy and takes about £70 billion out of the UK's bank balance. And for somehow they're not regarded as traitors that have caused great economic ruin. And this Olympics ceremony was the point at which I think Britain probably was at its highest regard in living memory, in regards of how Britain was seen by the rest of the world. It was a great act of ambassadorship that laid out all of Britain's achievements. Yes, not every part of it was perfect, and not everything that Britain had ever done in the previous 100 years had been amazing. We had, the Windrush scandal. We had things like, nuclear bomb testing and all that type of stuff, and slavery and India and all that, which I'm very cognizant of, but I'm not a world history expert. But this was where Britain tried to kind of consolidate everything that Britain's done that put the great into Britain over the previous few decades, and laid it out in a interesting articulate and artistic way. And yet, the scene where the artists and the performers on the floor of the Olympic Stadium all converged together to create the NHS symbol was regarded by some as mere left-wing propaganda, as opposed to going, that's actually a brilliant thing that Britain has done for the people of Britain. Some people that were going on about wokeism and lefty liberals and all that nonsense. And I'm going, so you want to have private healthcare where you die if you can't afford to pay for things? And that's something you're meant to be proud of? Not everybody agrees with you. Isle of Wonder. I'm going a little bit left field, so let's bring it back now. Isle of Wonder is probably the best place to end this, because it was the soundtrack to the Olympic 2012 opening ceremony, directed by Danny Boyle, and it was something that was beautiful to see, and Underworld soundtracked it perfectly, and I'm very, very happy that we had that moment, even if there's a bit where, you know, everything that happened in the past 10 years politically has been pretty much a bin fire and a shit show of the fuck factory. Is that Isle of Wonder was a moment where Britain just looked at itself and went, you did good. Yeah. And sometimes you do need to look back upon what you've achieved and what you've done and where you've been and where you've come from, and the things that you've done, the battles that you have fought, the mountains that you have climbed, and the monsters that you have conquered, and look back at it and go, God, we did well. And Isle of Wonder was that, and that is where it is. And I'm very, very happy that we had that moment. Also, by the way, it's a very good soundtrack CD. It features new Underworld tracks, about half an hour of new Underworld music, and about half an hour of new Underworld remixes, all of which I will post links to in the comments, as well as the opening ceremony, if I can find it. That brings Underworld's Barking album and the period immediately after it to a close. I am not going to understate this at all. To me, it's a very, very important record. It was the soundtrack to, as I've said before, me casting off the shackles of depression and being able to recognise that I had defeated monsters in my life, and my life has been much, much better pretty much from the moment where I heard this album, because I suddenly realised that the things that I used to love, the things I used to enjoy that had ceased working, had started working again. Music had started touching me in a way that between about 2006 and 2009 it hadn't, because the world had been grinding me down with stuff and things, and suddenly there was a moment when I listened to this and I suddenly realised it didn't change me. I got the old me back, and that's a wonderful place to be, as long as the old you wasn't a jerk. But I got the me that I used to be. They didn't succeed in changing me through the things that they tried to do. People mistake this affable exterior, or affable maybe, I don't know, the exterior that I have as somebody that's doesn't take things seriously, or perhaps doesn't fight hard for what they believe in. I will fight to the death for something if I believe in it. And humour, optimism, they're weapons and they're superpowers, and you can't let them do this to you and change who you are. And when I listened to this album and I realised they didn't succeed, I won. And sometimes that's what you need to do, is to look back at what's happened and to go, I won. And yeah, that sounds very smug. I'd much rather have never fought the battles at all. I'd much rather have had no monsters to defeat, but I did. And I'm here, and I'm now, and I'm talking about my record collection to a literal handful of people on YouTube. So I guess if that's what I want to do, that's a form of winning, isn't it? Yeah, really do need to work on my endings. So yeah, there we are. But Barking, great record. I'm going to post some links. I recommend it. If you like Underworld, this is a real fantastic album that I think is overlooked because it has outside producers. It's overlooked because it didn't sell a huge amount of copies. And it's much, much better than the legacy it has given it. It's a really good Underworld album, and it's amongst my favourites. And every time I listen to it, I feel happy. And that's one of the best things that you can ever have from a record, is that every time you listen to it, it makes you happy, because happiness is the thing that, more than anything else, if we should aspire to anything in this world, we should aspire to enjoying our time on this planet, and the people that we are with, and the people that we are. And that is where we end it. Good God, probably my longest Notcast yet, 55 minutes. If you made it all the way to the end, you deserve a biscuit. See you later. Bye.